not just like what we talk about, but how we talk about psychedelics. And
It's like a tiger or a puma?
Decomposing the Shadow, Lessons from the Psilocybin Mushroom. The other one is called The True Light of Darkness. Your mushroom experience is supposed to be fun and positive. And if you feel sad or feel scared, this is bad. And if that's how you feel, it's a bad trip. And bad trips are bad and you should avoid them at all costs, right? But to me, I said, okay, of course, something bad can happen. As far as the data is concerned, it is something that could be very good for your brain. Show me how to heal. Eventually, I knew what to ask was show me where the hurting is so I can heal.
Te doy la bienvenida a Microphone Podcast, un espacio que nos ayuda a amplificar nuestra voz, un aparato como el micrófono que desde lo más micro nos ayuda a que nuestra voz se escuche y se expanda como nos ayudan los expansores y potenciadores de la conciencia. En este podcast vamos a hablar de temas de desarrollo y evolución personal de la humanidad, de las leyes universales, de las microdosis, hongos, psilocibina y temas que verdaderamente nos ayudan con alto valor a poner a prueba y en práctica los aprendizajes que estamos teniendo en el día a día, que nos ayuden a integrar y escuchar las voces de otras personas que tienen sabiduría, conocimiento y muy grandes experiencias para compartir. Disfrútalo.
Welcome, James. We are here in the Microphone Podcast. This episode that's important you have it in English. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, James, I just met him last week, and it's amazing what you've been doing in your podcast. So, my first question is, who's James Jesso? What are you doing, and what is your project about?
Yeah, so I have been working in a, say, more mature way with psychedelics now for about 15 years. And prior to that, a little bit less mature, a little bit more youthful play. And about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Decomposing the Shadow, Lessons from the Psilocybin Mushroom, and began doing a lot of public speaking on the mushroom and psychedelics, trying to help change the conversation. So in 2013, when I released my book, they weren't talking about psilocybin on CNN, right? They were talking about mushrooms on Fox. I've actually been on Fox News, but that's a different story. And so I wanted to change the conversation from bad drugs or hippie tripping, whatever, to, hey, these are medicine. These are beautiful. They can help us heal. They can help us feel. You know, the saying of like, it's not about feeling better. It's about getting better at feeling and being able to be like, the mushrooms finally teach us this. And at some point I decided to start the podcast because I wanted to make it a career financially that I can, with Patreon, earn an income producing this work, but also give back in a more dynamic way. And also as a bit of an excuse to talk to people that I really respect or whose work is really wonderful. And in this, I have found over the years it evolving to being about contributing to psychedelic cultures in not just like what we talk about, but how we talk about psychedelics. And the tagline of my show is topics about like how to work with or through our psychedelic experiences to become better people, not just for ourselves, but for all those with whom we are nested in relationship, presently and across time, human and non-human alike. And so my podcast is very much about giving that onto the culture in whatever little way. Maybe it means nothing in the long run, but I'm trying. Yeah.
That's great. So it's a lot of work, and it should be beautiful having this pretext to talk with people and blending the conversation of psychedelics that has different and diverse point of views, and to offer your perspective and showing the point of view as well from others. I think it's so necessary. And you've been doing your podcast since 2015?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And I want you to share to us 3 challenges that you have faced during all these times that you can share, and what is the teaching that you have from these experiences?
So specific to making the podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one challenge was, call it like the learning curve, is going from I want to make a podcast to what does that mean? What does that take? And then over the years, learning how to make it sound better and look better, which is like a very steep learning curve that just keeps climbing and climbing. Like every time I sit down to record, I've done this for almost 10 years. I've got all the equipment, I got everything, and I still sit down and go, how can I make this better? Right? So this is a challenge. This is very like business end of the thing, of course. And the other challenge being, how do I can put a lot of love and care and attention and energy and create something very beautiful that nobody hears, because how do I make it something that lots of people will listen to, or lots of the right people, without cheapening or selling myself out to do so, trying to chase the algorithm, chase the trends or the themes, but also not trying to be so like obscure that it's only like the real weirdos that want to listen,
Yeah.
This has been a challenge. For the first challenge, of course, it's just learning, practice, being able to accept that, no, I did not do a good job on that audio and I need to work better. Or maybe I should, like when I first started with the video, I had this like big beard and everything was tie-dye and I had a giant nose ring, and I was outrageous. I loved it. I don't care. I was outrageous. But then as I moved along, I was like, well, I might want to look a little more professional, Interesting. But with the not selling myself out, but not like trying to be too weird, it's been an interesting dance to follow what I'm passionate about and follow what's interesting in the scene, but not try to get views, right? And also to be careful about not making my podcast a really long commercial for products, and also being careful to not accidentally contribute to aspects of the culture that I don't want to see on display. Like I won't interview anyone from a ketamine clinic, for example. If they have a book, okay, sure, right? But it's just so weird right now in especially the ketamine clinic space in North America. And I don't know what it's like here in Mexico, but in the United States and in Canada, like the big private medicine and many, many thousands of dollars. And you have a lot of people who are just charging you thousands of dollars to come in, and they hook you up to the ketamine for 2 hours. And then they say, are you good to go? Okay, peace out. Thank you for my money. See you in 2 weeks. And there are others that are doing good work. So I want to be careful about that. But I don't really know what the answer to that is yet, because I'm still trying to figure it out. The third challenge is probably the most like personal, is that 3 years ago I was in a car accident, and my partner and I sustained head injuries, like a traumatic brain injuries, and trying to like stay in the intellectual space of all the research and the administration and the post-production and the emailing and the correspondence and the planning and the interviewing, like all of these things became very, very difficult. And it was very hard for me emotionally and cognitively. And for the most part, this continues, but the way that I've been finding my way through it is with good family support and trying to like trust the process and trust in something larger that's moving through, and recognize that I can only do my best and hope for the best as I work towards the best, and honor myself at my worst as well. And that's probably been like the biggest podcast challenge, but that was also a big life challenge. So yeah.
What I can see is a lot of challenges in the emotional, physical, intellectual area, but also with the community, right? So it's important, what are you talking about, and how to solve these problems, that you can talk with people, like all what you mentioned with ketamine, that in Mexico, I think very soon we'll have these talks next month. Well, no, in a couple of weeks, we have a psychedelic summit in Mexico City and lots of medical point of view, because it's basically that. And they are trying to regulate it, and like these topics are still not available in Mexico. Is like we are rediscovering our own culture in terms of mushroom philosophy, etc. So it is great that we can have this conversation, even if it's in English, and that having you, it is great. I saw you this week on the FUN Casa del Té in here in San Cristobal. And when you give me your card, just when you left, I saw this beautiful logo, this beautiful, it's like a tiger or a puma.
So I had a friend of mine. His name is Eduardo Kine. He's Mexican. He lives in Puerto Vallarta. I met him in Calgary many years ago. He lives back now in Mexico. And I asked him to make me a logo. He knew my work. He knew me. He was a dear friend, or still is. And he knew the thing I was doing. And I said, I want you to make a logo that reminds you of me, but also makes you think of the podcast, but is also an animal. And so that's what he came up. Yeah.
That's great. I will upload this to this episode, because when I saw it, it's like, oh, I saw it before, and in social media, and I've been looking at the podcast, old videos. Like, you have lots of content from many years, and I think it comes from education. What are you sharing? And also information, and isn't easy in the social media, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. To have like a long form content that is meant, it's not easy to just put on and listen to. You say like Joe Rogan or many other kinds of comedy podcasts or stuff. You don't really have to listen, and I can still get a lot out of it. I'm not saying that's bad. Those are great. Well, Rogan is up or down depending on what you like, but that kind of podcast is wonderful. But the podcast that I make is like sometimes they're like 2-hour lecture courses. It's not me lecturing. I have a guest, and that's another challenge, is learning how to stay active but make sure it's still about my guest and not just me talking. That's tough. But yeah, so they really take time to listen. So it's hard to get a large audience who wants to say, hey, sit down and really pay attention for 2 hours about this more common, but generally quite obscure topic, which is psychedelic.
It is, yeah. I want to know one of the biggest mistakes you have done during this, especially in the podcast programming, or even considering your book, and what did you learn from it?
Okay, here's one. My first ever podcast episode. You can go back, you can listen to it. It's with a man named Peter McCoy. He's from Seattle. He wrote a book called Radical Mycology, and it was basically how to grow your own mushrooms, like very DIY, maybe not guerrilla, but like almost guerrilla gardening style of mycology. And he also would talk about the mushroom life cycle as a metaphor for understanding how the generation and dissemination of ideas can create sort of explosions in cultural change, right? Like the sporing of ideas, right? And I thought that, when I smoke a joint, I sit down with someone, I feel like I have great conversations. So I thought to myself, it'd be a really good idea. I'll smoke a joint, and then we'll have this interview. It'll be great because I'm a better conversationalist. And I was so awkward and so anxious and bumbling over my words. And I was like, I will never do this again. I will never take cannabis before recording a podcast ever again. So that's maybe one lesson. Some people can, and good for them, but not me.
That's super cool, because I can imagine that. And yeah, I remember this beautiful book, Radical Mycology. And I want to know more about your book, what is its name and what it's about.
So I have 2 books. I have a third one, but it's a secret. So only those who know will know. But you can find it if you look for it on the internet.
Cool.
But so I have 2 books. One is called Decomposing the Shadow, Lessons from the Psilocybin Mushroom. The other one is called The True Light of Darkness. And both of them were about looking at the mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, differently. where key things are, looking at it from an ally that can help us on our spiritual journey, but also our emotional psychotherapeutic journey, but not in therapy terms. In sort of, how do so the premise of decomposing the shadow is to say, I have parts of me that are stuck in there, dark parts, sad parts, grief, pain, things that are there, and they're like obstructing, almost like obstructing digestion. If you have a piece of food that's just stuck in your stomach, right? Or it's called fecal impacted feces or something, and you can't get as much nutrients. And the mushrooms, being what's called like saprophytes, right? They decompose wood and they release those nutrients into the soil. So my sense was, when the mushrooms come in, they can help you decompose your shadow, your dark parts. It can be sadness, it can be grief, it can be fear, it can be loneliness, it could be these things, and that's not bad. When I was, this is probably not new to your listeners or to yourself, but when I was writing this book and going through my own journeys that led me to write it, there was a real sense that your mushroom experience is supposed to be fun and positive. And if you feel sad or feel scared, this is bad. And if that's how you feel, it's a bad trip. And bad trips are bad, and you should avoid them at all costs, right? But to me, I said, okay, of course, something bad can happen. You can get hurt by these things, of course. But that you feel sadness is not a problem. If anything, that is the medicine. You should be ready to do this. Like, that is where some of the most meaningful stuff is going to come from, is when you spend some time feeling lonely or realizing how much shame you have for a thing you did 20 years ago, but didn't think it was a problem till today. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I hurt people, and this kind of stuff. And so this idea that it decomposes the shadow, and when that happens, it, like breaking down wood to release nutrients into the soil, it releases the nutrients of this stuck stuff. And I say it works like fertilizer for your spiritual soil. You can really do something with it. Now I look back and I can say, you could also do nothing with it. You can have a really beautiful experience where you cry and you realize all these things about yourself, and then you're really nice for a few days, but then in a week you're doing the same old shit anyways, make no difference, right? So much of my work since then has been like, so how do we become better people, not just for ourselves, but for all those we're in relationship with? And so Decomposing the Shadow was about this, but it's very like heady, very like a textbook.
Yeah.
The True Light of Darkness, I decided some people don't like reading a textbook. They like reading a story. So I talk about the same things in Decomposing the Shadow, but I do so like I'm telling a story. And I tell the story of 3 journeys that I went through where I faced something very difficult, each one more difficult. And then to tell it in a way where you're reading me, you're in the journey with me, you're going through it with me, you're realizing what I'm realizing, and eventually you're coming with me as I try to make sense of what it all means, so that I don't look back and go, oh, that was scary, I didn't like that. I look back and go, wow, that was very difficult. Here's all the things that I learned, and here's how I'm going to apply it into my life. So that's what the 2 books are. Right now I'm working on a 3rd, also about mushrooms, but now it's like 10 years since the last book and hundreds of hours with experts from around the world, and trying to synthesize all of this, looking deeply at relationships. Who are we to and with and for each other? Where mushrooms can fit into that, and including not just the relationships here, but like the relationships to the land, to the animals, to the non-corporeal beings, although I don't talk too much, but I don't want to scare the normies too much, of course. But this kind of thing. Yeah.
That's great. Where are you from and where are you living?
Una muy breve pausa. Te invito a que revises aleacionfun.com y encuentres las bellas membresías que hemos diseñado para ti para vivir el mejor día de tu vida hoy, que lo puedes apreciar. Y también, si estás en México o Argentina, que conectes con los adaptógenos, las microdosis de psilocibina que hemos diseñado especialmente para ti. Son personalizadas, encuentra todos los productos disponibles, y si estás listo para un proceso como esto, por favor contáctanos, déjanos tus comentarios acá abajo. A disfrutar.
So I'm from Canada. My parents are both from the furthest east coast of Canada, on an island off the east coast called Newfoundland. where it was predominantly settled by French and Irish and some Scottish. So it's got like a real dialect. Oh, okay. How's it getting on there, buddy? How's this time? And then we moved to Ontario, which is where Toronto is. I don't live in Toronto, but I live close to Toronto. So that's where I'm from.
Great. So I had my first experience with mushrooms, the psychedelic ones in Canada. It has been amazing and having this communication with them. So the first book, it is amazing. I think with all people that is hearing that, because decomposing all this materia as energy that we have, it could be emotions, could be just energy, and how mushrooms help us to make something with it. As you say, you can help it, you can use it to make a compost or grow something from it, or just nothing, and you decide to put it off away and then continue your life as if nothing happens. Like, anyways, the relationship with mushrooms and with nature is, I think, like mediated by our free will, as much as we decide to approach this experience, this process with mushrooms, that they help us quite a lot, right? And so I think it's great to that you wrote a book talking about it, because we as you said have these polarities in terms of, I'm talking about the funny trip and so wonderful, beautiful experience, and putting in the dark box all these experiences that are non really good, non beautiful, non likely. And I think the contrast of it is amazing. It's so necessary as well, because it's what we are made of. And I want to have this to take this idea of, it's not just for ourselves. Like, when we are doing psychedelics, I think it's not just to heal ourselves, understand, comprehend ourselves, but as you said, with land, soil, nature, animals, mushrooms. Like our company is called Aleación FUN, that it's in English is Alloy. This morning, I'm talking with my partner, having a podcast about Arcturians, like some other entities as well. So it will be interesting to talk about it in another episode. And now I want to know, how was your first experience or first approach with the mushrooms?
So I like to joke that my first exposure to psychedelic mushrooms was Super Mario. Yeah. But my first, I could say there are two main phases. So I could get more complex and then it spirals out of control. But we'll say there's two. And there's when I was using them as a young person. We'll say like using them in a more like a child relationship. I don't want to sound derogatory. Being a child is a beautiful thing, of course, right? And much of the time we want to reactivate that childlike state. That's a part of the joy of the mushrooms. But it was more like not with a lot of adult mindfulness. There's that phase, and then there's the phase of my life where I began taking them with adult mindfulness. And in between that was when I was taking them and many other things very irresponsibly, and I was hurting myself, and I was acting in ways that were causing harm to other people in my behaviors and my choices. Nothing too extreme, but just being selfish and indignant. And the mushrooms played a big role in me learning my way out of that. And that's when the mature adult work started. The young stuff was when I was 14 and taking it with my friends, playing video games. But the first time I had mushrooms, I was 14, 15. My girlfriend is on a trip. I haven't talked to her in a while. Now I'm 38, so this is more than 20 years ago. And so there was no cell phones or whatever. She was whatever. And I was just so desperate. I haven't talked to my girlfriend in almost 7 days, As a teenager, this was like my world was ending. So my friend says, well, come over. We got some mushrooms. And I was like, okay. And then while I'm there, my mom doesn't know. She thinks I'm just sleeping over at a friend's house. And at some point she calls and she says, your girlfriend called, but she's like, I told you weren't home, but I told her to call back in a half hour. and if you want, I can come pick you up and take you home. And I was, of course, I want to talk to her. So I was like, yes. So she came to pick me up and she brought me home, and I was so high. Before that, I thought it was all good. I was having a good time. And then she brought me home. I went down into my basement to wait for this call. She didn't know anything, which was fun. And I'm in the basement waiting, and I start to feel this anxiety. And I think, okay, I'll just go on the internet. And there was no social media. You had to know where you wanted to go. And I tried finding all these fun websites that I like, and they didn't help. They all felt hollow. So I tried to watch TV, but TV wouldn't help. It was all hollow. None of it was real. None of it meant anything. And at some point, I ended up curled up on the floor like this by myself, like rocking in like a cold sweat, panicking. And then my girlfriend called, and I talked to her for a minute, and then I said I took mushrooms, and then she got upset with me because I didn't wait for her. That we're 14, 15, doesn't matter. We're young, we make choices. And so I was like, I gotta go. And I hung up, and I called my friends. I said, please come get me. You need to come get me. And this is bad. They drove their car to come get me. This is, those of you listening, if you don't already know it, do not drive your car on mushrooms. No bueno.
Absolutely not.
Right? So, but I got back, and everything, I was like, I could breathe, right? My mother didn't know. She didn't know till many years later, and it was a big conversation. But this is my first time. And after that, it was all just play, right? But I look back, and there was a really important lesson. I didn't realize that the lesson was until sometime later, but it was like all this TV and all the internet, it was empty. It was hollow. I could feel it. What I really needed was to be with my friends. That mattered. That really mattered. As a teenager, I didn't get that. But I did eventually get it later, right? So, but then when I was 23, that's at 23.
Sí.
I was just coming out of a period of time where I was using a lot of substances, very recreationally, but also recklessly, sort of dangerously. And I had some realizations with LSD that was like, yo, your life is a mess. And so I was trying to get better, and I didn't know how to, and I was very depressed. And at the time, I knew Terence McKenna. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with Terence McKenna. And I thought to myself, ayahuasca would help. But this is 2009. There's no ayahuasca in southwestern Ontario, at least as far as I know. And I was 23. I didn't have any money, So I thought, maybe mushrooms. Terence McKenna said the mushrooms are a teacher. Maybe it'll be mushrooms. And I started by me, and eventually I would go alone. And then at some point I would go hang out with my friend and talk about my experience. But I would just go in and say, show me how to heal. That was it. Show me how to heal. Eventually I knew what to ask was, show me where the hurting is so I can heal. Right?
Yeah.
And it was in this time, I did this once a month, every month under the full moon for 13 moons. And by the end of that, I was in a totally different place in my life. And that's where I learned the stuff that would become Decomposing the Shadow. And of course, learning goes from there. I look back and I was like, wow, I was so naive. I thought I knew so much about the mushrooms. And now 15 years later, I'm like, I know it was nothing. Now I feel like I know even less. Right? Yeah.
So Terence McKenna called it a committed dose, right? To have this whole experience by yourself. And I want to share what I heard from your first experiences. You have a whole history that's amazing, but also you have the teaching. What is this lesson about? All this experience give you something, for example, all that about media, TV, internet, that in a way is empty. And I think it's when we can integrate these experiences that it's like when we are not doing it, it's just having a nice story, and we can call it a nice bad trip, as you say. Like we just put our criticism into it, our opinions. And talking about the committed dose, have you been doing microdosing? What do you think about them?
Yes, I've microdosed many, many times. have found, thanks to Paul Stamets, that really I do find much more benefit when I mix it with the lion's mane mushrooms, like a good lion's mane mushrooms. Or you would know there's a lot of products that are not very good, of course, but like a good extract lion's mane mushroom. And I have found that it helps, but dose matters, because someday it helps and it's like, okay, I can just feel a little bit more in love with life. And other days it's like, oh, it turns out I'm actually really sad. I thought I was taking the mushrooms to feel better, but apparently they're just going to help me get better at feeling how sad I am. And then I thought I was going to be productive, but actually I need to lie on the couch and feel my feelings. And it's not like I'm on a journey, but it's like, okay, I feel much more in tune with myself. But for the most part, I found it to be quite positive. When I had done it for longer periods of time, 5 days on, 2 days off, I did notice that it helped me quite a lot. In the winters in Canada, unlike here in Mexico, it gets really dark. We're talking sun is up at 8 a.m., sun is down at 4 p.m. It's nighttime at like 4 p.m. Okay, this is dark. This is super cold. And cold. You don't want to go outside. Look, I looked today for the weather. As of right now, it's -7 degrees. So that's siete. And then in 4 days, the weather overnight is supposed to go down to -21 degrees.
Wow.
Okay, so
different
it's dark.
to this winter of San Cristobal.
Yeah, I know it's cold here, but I just have to put on an extra blanket and I'm fine. I don't have to wear the parka and zip up, cover my face like this. But I have found that it helps to get through the winter, because like the darkness can be really challenging. Although since my head injury, I found that unfortunately the microdosing results were somewhat positive, but they never really lasted, unfortunately. But I have a deep love and respect for microdosing as an avenue, and I think I've known many people who have gotten a lot out of it, known some people that have not gotten much out of it. I think that there's some confusion on what a microdose is. Some people, especially if they sell products, tend to put a little bit too much in it, and people think it's a microdose when they're really just small tripping, So, yeah.
It's true, completely.
But the reality is, as far as the data is concerned, it is something that could be very good for your brain. I mean, in Decomposing the Shadow, I present a theory that we as a society are suffering from a nutritional deficiency. And that nutritional deficiency is psilocybin mushrooms. And we were actually better people when we had journeys. I don't know if I'd stand behind that now, like as empirical fact, but as a concept, I think it still remains valid.
Yeah, sounds great. So I will add in this podcast the link to your podcast and to your books, if you agree with,
Of course.
so people can know more about what are you doing. And I want to know, what is your projection for this year, 2025, in terms of your projects with your book as well and with your life as well?
Yeah, so my desire in 2025 is to get my book that I'm writing now, get it as close to done as possible. Ideally, if I am realistic with myself, that the manuscript is complete and I'm now working with an editor, or even maybe further along by then. But probably more realistically, starting to work with an editor. This is my main goals. Normally every year I do goal setting, where I spend a couple of days just writing about goals and thinking about what goals I did last year and how did I achieve them or did I not? Why or why not? What got in my way? But very much there's a sense of just wanting to stay committed to the practice of writing, and so that the book can be finished. Essentially, that's like my number one goal. And my other goals, like be a good partner, be a good brother, be a good uncle, be a good person. Those goals, sometimes you don't realize that you didn't achieve them till sometime later, but the fingers crossed is that I'm gonna nail it this year.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, sometimes we just can't see it, how it's our main goals, just to be here and be a bit better than yesterday. Lately, at the end, I want to know, what is your vision for your life in 20 years? How do you see yourself?
Hopefully in Mexico. Yeah. Maybe. It's hard See, this is a hard question for me because coming out of my car accidents with the book and all these things, I kind of feel like it's hard for me to envision right now what comes after I finish the book, because it has had to become such a, almost like a life-saving, like a life raft. It's like, this is why I'm getting better. This is what I'm working on. And I can see when things are going better based on how things were going in my writing and my podcasting and stuff. And so right now it's hard for me to conceive past that on like a practical business side of things. But if I were to tell you what my intention is, it's to be financially stable, to be healthy, to be still with I have a partner now, her and I have been together for 6 years, that we are still together, that we are good community members, that I am still my nephews are healthy. Ideally, my parents are still healthy, but 20 years is a bit of a stretch, with them being older. So that's the reality too. That's part of the mushroom experience, is to like get part of me, but fucking real about that kind of stuff too, So I guess those are hopefully where I'd like to be in 20 years while I'm working on. Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing. So I want to thank you for being here and having this interview, this podcast that it makes me realize how the psychedelics and our process that we have through them and with them is to basically be here and putting your goals into the really important things, like being your best version, or how to say, like, just be healthy, be present, be consciously here right now, and accepting and valorating, right? Like being thankful of what we have today, and putting the energy and love with our partners, community, society, family members. And it's just like a more simple way. I think it's if you agree, in to see the life in the easiest way, right? Not just a huge project and a global idea, or not just 20, 50 years, but today.
Yeah, I think there are many things that are very interesting about psychedelics. We could get into the neuroscience of it and the philosophy of it. And then there's like questions about entities and spirits. And then there's like the practice of like the art of like ceremonialism or working with the mushrooms. There's all these incredibly interesting ideas. We can go really far out. But when I think about like, what is the sort of core, what is a core? Because I don't know, but a core thing that we can take away from the mushroom is like, just like being with each other in a good way, right? Like this is, if we just think about like, okay, what's the most sort of within reach thing? I'm going out, figuratively, a metaphor, I'm going out, I'm going to forage some food from the forest. This food is the mushrooms, okay? Am I going to come home and set them on the table, being like, yeah, that was great, I had some good mushrooms, and just let them rot on the table, right? Or do I make the effort to be like, okay, this is good food, now how do I eat it and be nourished such that with that nourishment, I can give back to the world that gave me this nourishing gift of food, right? And I think that there's something about the mushroom experience that if we approach it in a certain way, can teach us that. In a way that's very specific. It's for you, it's for me. It's mine isn't necessarily for you and yours isn't necessarily for me, but the mushrooms go right in there and show you what you need to see. And I think that's very beautiful.
Amazing. I want to finish with this, because I think that what you said, that all these experiences, these teachings, learnings that we have from mushrooms is having all these benefits for ourselves. In some point, the teaching is as well to make yourself a giver, not just wondering and thinking, what kind of mushroom can I pick, which one I can eat, which one heals, which one doesn't, and just looking at them as something that fits me, but as well, when every time we are going to the forest, to any place where are the food, the mushrooms, to consider, what can I offer with this? What can I do with it? How can I expand the mushrooms' wisdom as well, the humanity wisdom, and all of these benefits, not just considering how can I take how can I benefit myself, and in some point, and I think that's part of the personal journey of everybody. In some point, we just get into it to have all of this and to share it, to expand it in some way. Like, I think it's creating what the way that humans can offer, can give, can correspond to what we have. And it's something that you're doing with your books, with your podcast, and many ways that you are sharing all these experiences, all these teachings, lessons, and having these conversations with other people. So I want to thank you and close with it. I will add on the comments, as I said, the link to the books of James and more information that you want to share. Yeah, the podcast as well. Muchas gracias, and see you soon. And we'll see you. Are you still in Canada and Mexico, right?
I will be in Mexico for 2 more weeks.
Cool, amazing. Yeah, so let's contact you, James, and hear this amazing podcast. So thank you.
Gracias por estar hasta acá, aprecio muchísimo tu presencia y tu conciencia con toda la atención en este video. Si te ha gustado y si no también, suscríbete. Si estás en YouTube, dale click a la campanita para que te lleguen las notificaciones. Si estás en Spotify, danos un review con 5 estrellas si te ha gustado y compártenos con tus amigos. Síguenos en nuestras redes, visita aleacionfun.com y te deseo que tengas un gran día.
Great.